Welcome to the Top Knot Squad,
a podcast for the mom, parent, or woman who doesn't exactly fit in, but loves hard anyway.
Hosted by Naya, Adriana, and Alexis.
3 friends passionate about their beliefs
And unafraid to speak their minds.
Are you ready to laugh, be vulnerable, and keep it real with us?
Top knots are not required. On today's episode, the squad will be discussing the Enneagram with local Enneagram expert Abi Robins. Abi is a yoga teacher, yoga therapist, Enneagram coach, and fellow podcaster that Alexis just adores. Abi introduced us to all things yoga and Enneagram and has helped us, as I'm sure many others, incorporate both practices into healing and growth. We asked Abi to join us today to give us and our listeners an intro to the Enneagram and, more importantly, how it can be helpful in relationships. As you can imagine, 3 mamas running one show may need a little help navigating the dynamics of not only friendship, but also the ins and outs of a working relationship. Today, we hope to explore a bit of each with our types and get feedback on how to share space outside of our own worldviews. Welcome, Abi. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys. This is great.
Yay! I'm excited.
Okay, so first things first, the most important lesson I learned, not Enneagram, Enneagram.
Yeah.
I will never make that mistake again. Yeah.
It's okay. No, I mean, it's not really that big of a deal. Everyone else would know what you were talking about, so.
Well, how about we start with you telling us a little bit about your work?
Cool, yeah. So I am a yoga therapist intern currently, so I will graduate in March, as long as I get my homework done. Yeah, so I work with people one-on-one to use the kind of tools of yoga, like conscious movement, breathing exercises, meditation, in order to help bring their body back into balance and back into health. So that could be anything from like post-op surgery recovery or general aches and pains or, just kind of whatever, catches or tics might happen in the body, as well as psycho-emotional issues, anxiety, depression, kind of run the gamut on that sort of stuff. So yoga therapy has kind of a broad scope. And so we work really well with other like healthcare professionals, so therapists, doctors, et cetera, to be kind of a part of a wellness team. And then I use the Enneagram kind of in conjunction with that in order to understand my clients better and to give my clients more tools to kind of take ownership of their growth and healing in, a more powerful and like grounded way.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very
cool. Alexis is like, yes, all of those things.
Do you think you could talk a little bit about what an Enneagram is and how that is different from like the Briggs-Myers personality test or some other thing?
Yeah, totally. So the Enneagram is, most basically, the Enneagram, that word just means 9-pointed symbol. And there's lots of different shapes out there that this Enneagram kind of takes, but the one that we're talking about is basically this shape that people have kind of like sacred geometry and that sort of stuff. So it stems back quite a ways. Like there's a lot of talk to like 4th century Sufis, and it's old.
Very cool.
Yeah. What's a Sufi?
A Sufi is the it is the mystic tradition of Islam, and so there's a little bit of like inclination that it might have come a little bit from them, and like the very early like Christian mystics, and then there's a blend of like kind of some a-religious things that are all thrown in. So the history of it is a little murky, but what it's being used for now is kind of this map of personality. So somebody who was studying the Enneagram and in the sacred geometry sense was a psychoanalyst and started seeing that it lined up with what his clients were facing.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay.
And so through this process of like interviewing people and just getting more and more people, there was a line of probably 4 or 5 people who kind of fleshed out what we have now as the Enneagram of personality. And so it shows us kind of who we are, what we look like in terms of thinking, feeling, and doing or taking action. And it shows us what we look like when we're really healthy, and it shows us what we look like when we're unhealthy. It shows us kind of the path to growth and the path to balance and healing in a way that is kind of uniquely Western in a lot of senses. So it's not like yoga is a really wonderful model, but it's very Eastern. And so a lot of the concepts can be really hard for, people living in Austin, Texas to really grab hold of, just because it's not something that's steeped in our culture. And so the Enneagram is kind of a uniquely Western approach to this kind of like healing and transformation.
That's very cool.
Yeah. And so it's a lot more dynamic than like the Myers-Briggs that kind of just says, this is what you do, the end.
Right. Right.
And it's helpful. It's super helpful to know those things and know how other people see stuff. But the Enneagram gives you a lot more space and kind of offers you a lot more tools to dig yourself out of the hole that you're in, in whatever respect.
I really like that.
I know,
very
me too.
cool.
Yeah.
So background on me, I'm Indian. And so like the chakras and all of that stuff makes sense to me. So you talking about healing in one part of it, like it brought me back to that, especially when you talked about the difference in Eastern and Western ways to look at things. So
yeah, exactly.
That's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of like interplay in how they kind of work together. But I found the Enneagram to be something that's a lot more accessible for people who aren't, steeped in, Indian tradition.
Yeah. I don't know a whole lot of, I'm a bad Indian girl, but that's a podcast for a different time.
So I know it has some, like it's really big in Christian world.
Yeah, it's having a moment right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because it's not, we'll talk after.
Okay.
What?
Whoa. Yeah, it's kind of having a moment right now in like the Christian church world, but it's not specifically. It is a-religious, so it doesn't have any specific tie to any particular religion. When it first came to the United States, it was shared in some like retreat centers in California, in Esalen near Big Sur, and it was first shared to a group of Jesuit priests. Okay. And so they took it and shared it with their parishes, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's been kind of like two veins of Enneagram work that have developed in the U.S. And one is kind of like from this Christian perspective, and then one is from this like a religious perspective, or like spiritual but not religious perspective. And the church is like having a moment with it right now. It's like, oh my God, this is the best. And it's cool because I don't think it matters what you believe.
No, yeah.
This work is really transformational.
Yeah.
So, as long as you're getting good information and you're really engaging with the work, like it's going to be good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that why you went to California? Is that like a base for Enneagram?
Yeah, it's one of them. So the Berkeley, San Francisco area is one of the big hubs for Enneagram training. The other one's in New York. So in Berkeley is the narrative Enneagram, or I guess it's technically Menlo Park, which is like just south of San Francisco. But that's the narrative Enneagram started by Helen Palmer and David Daniels. And then in New York, there's the Enneagram Institute. And these are the kind of two big centers for learning and studying about the Enneagram. So,
and you did narrative.
Yes.
And why does that now make you the badass person you should talk to Enneagram about?
Well, there's a lot of misinformation. That's kind of the first thing. And I think maybe more importantly than that, there is, they say with great power comes great responsibility. There are a lot of people who are using this great power and are not being very responsible with it. And so one of the really big things that I loved about the narrative and the teachers that come from there and their program in general is it's very much about not just what you learn, but how you hold it and how you share it. So it's much more about you and like your level of being and the way that you're sharing it and working with other people, and giving other people the space to really grow. And so that's why I chose to do the narrative. And I think that the narrative is a really like heartfelt approach, and it's something that really creates the space for this to be something more than just something you learn about yourself. And then like, you put the book up on the shelf and then like if somebody asks about it about a party, then you're like, oh yeah, well I'm a 5-wing 4 and such and such. And it's like, okay, great. But if you're not using it in your everyday life and you're not, engaging with the work, then it's just kind of another file to put away in your brain.
So the work involves knowing the whole system.
I mean, you can do the work just by knowing your own type, but it's more about how you're putting it into action and like how what you've learned about yourself gives you the ability to make different choices. Like it's all based on like your habits of thinking, feeling, and doing. And when you become aware of those and you realize, oh, this is just a habit that I always do, maybe I don't have to do that. Maybe I could try something else.
So maybe more like living for your type or living according to what might be beneficial.
Exactly. So it's like you could live out your type's patterns and you could just do that for the rest of your life. And, you know, you're going to always run into the same problems and you're going to always have the same miscommunications and you're always going to feel the same way in your body. Or you could see that those are patterns and that's not the only way to do things and start to, you know, do practices that allow you to move outside of that.
I like that.
Yeah. And I mean, it's crazy. Like it sounds so simple, but when you put it into action,
No. I'm sure it's really difficult.
Yeah. But then when you put it into action, it's really, I mean, so much changes. Like it's really incredible. Like, you know, I think it's definitely changed my life. Like it saved my relationship. It's made me into a person who could be in a good and healthy relationship, you know, working with this information. So,
it's got to be difficult because you're calling out 30 plus years of a habit or of a pattern.
Yeah.
And
I'm 29 though, so not quite.
You know.
Oh man, Abby, I thought you were in my generation.
Wait, how old are you?
Well, I'm younger. I'm younger of the TKS squad.
Oh, okay. Oh, look, you guys are going there is what you're saying.
I'm 36.
I'm 37. It doesn't bother me. I'm like, bring on my 40s. My 30s have been awesome. And,
I can't wait till I get gray hair. I feel like it would just fit my personality better.
What's kind of funny, just on that note, like, so I'm wearing, you guys can't see me who are listening right now, but I'm wearing bright red lipstick and I love makeup. And I think, you know, the other two TKS members know that. But for me, like, not dyeing my gray hair as it comes in is like, feels something really rebellious. I've also started not wearing concealer under my eyes. So like this is all sleep deprivation.
Wow.
No filter. But yeah, like
pulling it off.
All of that. Yeah. Anyway, that's a topic for another time again.
Tangent.
Yeah. We have a lot of those.
We do.
By the way, I'm 34. I didn't say that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Like you have this lifetime of patterns that you and you don't know their patterns for the longest time.
Right.
You just like, and you assume that everyone else does life the same way you do, and you can't figure out why aren't they falling in line? Why aren't they doing it? Why are they doing that? That makes no sense. It's like, well, it doesn't to you, but it certainly makes sense to them.
Yeah.
You don't make any sense to them, but they make sense to them.
I feel like we should give an example of this, like for the listeners to like understand. So I don't know if I don't know how we should do it, but
yeah. Let's see. What's a good like easy example?
We could use me and Ben.
Okay. I mean, if you're up for it, go.
Yeah. I don't know what number my husband would be, so yeah, go ahead.
He's a 3, which I didn't believe him, but he is. Because the other part about it is you're not supposed to type people, and you discover who you are on your own, right?
Yeah.
Did I say that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like you don't, the types are not prescribed to you in any way. Like you really, it's based on your own self-observation. Like you pay attention to yourself, and then you read the material, and you really get a feel for which type is you. And then that's your type. You know, it's not, you don't have to take a test. You don't have to like have somebody else tell you, you know, I can help with typing interviews and that sort of thing, but I'm not telling you what your type is. I'm like, it sounds to me based on a short conversation that you're somewhere in maybe these 2 or 3 numbers, which resonates most with you. You know, and the process can take, you know, it could take 30 minutes. It could take 3 years. You know, it's different for everybody. But yeah, you decide your type. Like you own it.
Okay.
So, well, he's owned his 3-ness. I've owned my 8-ness. For a while, I thought I was really determined he was a 9, but since I'm not supposed to type him,
This is a struggle for 8s.
But I think that in our relationship, knowing he's a 3 and I'm an 8, one thing that I do as an 8 is I take up a lot of space. And so I'm really loud and like, what's the word? Passionate.
Yeah.
So anytime we ever have a disagreement, I go from 0 to 60 really quickly. And that's just how I walk the world. And it's not even that I'm like trying to be mean or that I'm angry at him or think he's stupid. It's just, I'm just loud. Like,
yeah, you're big. There's a lot of energy there.
Yeah. And so I actually don't really know. You might speak more to 3 for why this happens, but that like shuts him down. So anytime we have a conflict, when I have my space that way, he's like, oh, this is too much. I can't handle this. And so then we're not productive and don't figure our shit out.
Yeah.
So, but I'm actually forgetting what about 3s would make him that way.
I mean, 3s are what we call, they're in the heart triad. And so they're very concerned with their relationships, but they also carry a lot of shame and a lot of sadness. And so if they feel like especially if there's any sort of disagreement where he might be at fault.
Yes.
He's gonna take on a lot of shame, and a 3's like kind of core desire is to be successful.
Yes.
And so if there was a misstep or a perceived failure, a 3 is gonna need some space to figure that out. And some 3s, I mean, there are some 3s that are more introverted and some that are more extroverted, but some 3s will really engage in a conflict like that, like in order to win out, and then some 3s are like, absolutely not. Like, especially if internally there's some sense that arguing this way is not how you become successful. That's a big thing.
So speaking to growth, what I do now, like knowing about the Enneagram, is 1, I try to approach our conflict in a softer way. And then 2, I also recognize that he thrives more on praise. So I almost kind of like anytime I'm ever bringing up some need that I'm communicating, I do like my friend used this word, something sandwich.
The compliment sandwich.
That one. I do a compliment sandwich where, I'm still saying what I need and doing what I have to do, but I'm also like, you're so great at this. Thank you so much. Whatever it is. And so that I've found that has been helpful.
Yeah.
So, but I also like from the Enneagram perspective is that it's not only just me doing that work on his side, he's also doing work to be like, oh, when Alexis is taking up a lot of space and has a lot of energy, that doesn't mean XYZ. That's just how she talks.
Yeah. And I think that's like the biggest piece of like what the Enneagram can do for people is it like opens that door of like, oh, she just sees the world differently than I do. Like, we're just coming from different places and it's not personal. So, like, my partner is a 4 and that means that she's, like, withdrawing. And I'm also an 8. So I'm really, I pick fights to feel close to people, which I can recognize as a very unproductive behavior. That doesn't always mean I can stop.
Right.
But, and so when she wants to withdraw, I want to, like, chase after her and be like, no, we have to deal with this right now. And it's like, no, we don't. Like, that's my pattern running. That's something that's like running in the background that isn't real. Like, there is another way to approach this that might be more productive. And just because she's pulling away doesn't mean that she's abandoning me.
Right.
Or that she's rejecting me in some way. Like, she just needs a little bit of space. And, can I allow her that space? And then can she re-engage when it's right. And so it's like you get to this place where it's like, oh, okay, it's not really you doing this. It's kind of like your pattern. Like, not to like shove off self-responsibility, but to give yourself more space to like own it, and really work with it.
I like it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so I have a question. I just wrote it down in case I forgot. But I know we've been talking a lot about relationships in the sense of us having a significant other or partner in life, but what about with parenting and with kids? Is there an age that you should like help? I don't know, like your child can take a test to figure out, and I know it's not as basic as that, but just to get a ballpark idea.
So what I have found is the best thing that you can do for for your kids when it comes to parenting is learn your type.
Okay.
Because the way that you see your children is going to be colored by the way that you see the world from your Enneagram type. Mm-hmm. So, like you might have a kid who's really like hyper and full of energy and like attacking the world. Mm-hmm. And you might be like a 4 or a 5 or a 9, like somebody who's a little bit more reserved, a little bit more chill, a little bit more laid back in different ways. And that energy could seem super extreme to you. Mm-hmm. But really it's about learning how you're seeing them. And then it allows you more space to like meet them where they are.
Okay.
And
that
then
makes a lot of sense.
and then you can, you get a sense of where your kids fall. Like the more you learn about the system and the other types, and you kind of address your own, bias and how you're seeing things. Mm-hmm. I mean, you'll get a sense of what your kids' types are, but you don't ever tell them.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Like it's not like, oh, well, my kid is a such and such, like, aren't you? And they're like, yeah. It's like, no, you let them kind of figure it out on their own. Like a lot of the Enneagram scholars say by about age, like between 5 and 7, the personality's kind of set, but they're not really going to be self-aware enough to claim it for themselves until they're, much older. Mm-hmm. And so, like my partner and I use it and we kind of communicate to each other about it when we're talking about our girls, but it's never like, it's more like it's a problem solving tool. Right. It's like, we're working on this kind of like educated guess that our oldest is this and our youngest is this. So maybe we need to approach them a little bit differently. And then it's kind of like trying stuff on. Like, okay, like let's try this. If she is, if she's a 6, then maybe we try this on. If she's a 9, then maybe we try this on. And if those don't work, we try something else. Mm-hmm. But really what it is, it's about looking at what you're doing and kind of your reactivity and your kind of pattern responses to things, like your reactions to stuff. And can you work with those enough that like you can create a little more space around them? Because maybe there's a behavior that keeps happening because the kid wants something that you aren't giving them. And so it keeps happening because the need's not getting met. And it's less about adjusting the kid's behavior and more about seeing like, okay, what can I do? And how can I shift in order to meet this, to meet this need?
That's kind of exactly what we talked about on the sleep episode.
Yeah.
Or like we were talking just about like there's in parenting, there's no one size fits all.
Yeah.
And you have like we all have multiple children. So we've learned the second time around that you can't always parent your kids the same way. Yeah. You have to implement different styles with each of them. Yeah. So that aligns well with what you just said.
Yeah.
Totally.
And it's nice because once you kind of get an idea of the framework, then it's like, oh, well, here's like not quite, but like here's a like 9 prepackaged like ways to parent a kid.
Right.
And so it's like it's a little less like shooting in the dark because you have kind of these options to choose from. And I mean, you get a pretty good idea of what works and what doesn't pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Not that it's necessarily easy to implement.
Right, of course.
But it's like, okay, well, now I know what I should be doing.
Yes.
It's like, this is probably going to be the most effective. Whether or not I can carry that out every time is a different story, but that's where the yoga comes in. So anyway.
That's very cool. That makes a lot of sense to me. We raise, like, we're very much in like the child-led sort of behavior. So whether it's solids or potty training or sleep or whatever, it was like, well, we'll take their lead. We're not going to push anything on them just from the way that, well, I'm not going to lie. I kind of I drove the boat with all of that stuff. My husband's like, okay, babe, if you think it's great. I'm like, well, it's working so far. But I love that. And I love that we as parents kind of have to stop looking through our little blinders of how we view our kids and have to kind of look at them with a set of different eyes. So I really love that. Okay, that makes so much sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much about parenting that like you don't realize is like leftover junk from your childhood. Like, and it's like you have no clue that you're carrying around like this huge thing of baggage until a kid's dropped in your lap, and then you're like, where's all this coming from? Why am I acting like this?
You know how we were talking about the sass earlier at that 7-8-year-old age? I didn't realize, but that for me is a huge, like, I go ballistic I feel like I'm gonna explode, just like white hot rage, and I have to just be like, okay, honey, you didn't mean that. It really hurts me. And like take a step back. But it's one of those things, just like you said, like I didn't realize how much it affected me until my own kids started sassing me.
Well, and it's like for, we have 2 kids that our 2 girls could hardly be any different. I mean, they look the same, but they're like very different kids. And the younger one is very aggressive and really kind of in your face with her discontent, so to say. Like she will tell you what's up, and if she's back talking or if she's arguing or whatever, it's very in your face, and like I can deal with that. Like I don't like it's direct, and it feels like okay, like that's very much the way that I would handle things, so I can deal with that. But our older one is like more like sly about the way that she's like disobeying or like, whatever. And like, that's the stuff that drives me nuts. Me and too. I realized like, there's nothing wrong with her. It's my stuff, it's my stuff to look at. And it's like, oh, okay. Like I value really direct communication and I am not always the most emotionally in tune person. That's not a gift that I have. And so, I feel like my partner and I parent really well together because she is much more emotionally in tune. And so she can roll with that stuff much easier than I can, where I can deal with the more like confrontation stuff a little bit easier. But yeah, like it's my stuff that I'm pulling out. Right. It's not the girls. Yeah. Like they're tiny fresh humans.
Yeah.
Like,
it's like they're 8. They are 8.
Like, yeah, what? Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
That was good. That was a good question.
Yeah. It popped up and I was like, I need to write that.
So we did our Enneagram. Can I go ahead and talk about that?
Yeah.
I think I probably overtook it because I got several different. So I don't know. And it was on several different days and times, and they were always different. Okay. Which I thought was really interesting. But you had said earlier, it kind of depends, right, on your mood, and I guess.
Yeah, I mean, your type doesn't ever change, but the reason that tests aren't usually super accurate is that tests are kind of checking your behavior, where the Enneagram is much more based on the motivation for that behavior, and tests can't really like suss that out very well. And so your behavior is going to change from day to day, depending if you're feeling really good or maybe you're super stressed out or maybe a kid just like flushed a shoe down the toilet, like it could be anything, and it's going to adjust your behavior or how you're feeling in that moment. But a test isn't going to be able to kind of get down to like the core motivations of like, why are you feeling that way in the moment. So yeah, test results vary widely. I think one of my teachers said like even the best tests are only right 30% of the time.
Oh wow, so that's not a lot.
Yeah, it's not a lot.
So which ones did you test as? Like, what were the different numbers you got?
I got a 1 a couple times, which I can't remember what a 1 is. I got a 5 twice, and then I got a 7. And that was it.
Okay. Would it be helpful to know the motivations of those 3 or no?
Yeah. We can go there if you want to go there. We'll talk about like 1, 5, and 3.
Well, I think we'll have to anyway, right? Because Alexis tested at an 8, Naya's a 2, and then I guess the last time we spoke, I did it really quickly. It was like, I'm a 5, guys. We're trying to solidify our types, but yeah, I guess let's delve into this.
Cool. So 1s and 5s and 7s all have kind of some key elements that run together, like they're connected in different ways. So 1s and 5s are both they're in what we call the competency triad. So they're very concerned with doing a good job and being competent, and kind of for different reasons. 1s have this like really deep desire to be good and to be right. They're sometimes called the perfectionist. So they want to be right, like kind of the funny anecdote that goes around with 1s is like, if someone else loads the dishwasher, the 1s will come in and reload it.
Oh no!
Did we
I know you said not to typecast, but I think I just figured out what my husband is.
So like they really want things to be done correctly. And a 5 is also in this competency triad, but they always want to be kind of intellectually prepared. They're kind of always searching for knowledge and expertise, and so they're always trying to get more information. There's kind of this voracious consumption of information and knowledge. And then 5 and 7 share what we call a line. So like when a 5 feels on top of the world, when a 7 feels on top of the world, they're going to look a little more like 5. And when a 5 is kind of feeling like they need to take cover, they're going to look a little bit more like a 7. 7 and 1 share the same line, share another line. So when a 7's in a bad spot, they're going to look like a 1. And when a 1's in a good spot, they're going to look like a 7. And that's real confusing. There's a lot of like, if you look at the diagram with the numbers around it, it makes more sense. But if I'm just talking about it, it's like, that meme where it's like, the white lady with the math floating in her face. Yeah, that's what it's like. Like that's when I talk about the Enneagram, sometimes I feel like people are imagining like numbers and
floating numbers.
Wait, and what was 7's motivation?
So 7 is sometimes they call them the enthusiast or the epicure. 7s are their desire is to like never be trapped or in pain. 7s are sometimes like the life of the party. So they can bring a lot of energy and they can often be a lot of fun. They have this amazing ability to reframe bad situations. Like they don't want to be stuck in bad feelings. So the range of emotion they have is from like ecstatic to feeling good. And they never really want to dip past feeling good, into like feeling okay or bad. Like they don't really want to play with that. And they're like really looking for what's next and what's going to be the most fun in different ways. They always kind of want a little more. Sometimes they call them gluttonous in that sense, not like in a food sense, but in a like,
always feeling good kind of
like always feeling good. And like if 1 was good, then like 8's going to be even better. So it's like this always wanting more. But like when a 7 is in a bad spot, they can look a lot more like a 1. Like they get a lot more critical. They get a little more harsh, like a 1 that's not in a great space. But then 1s, when they feel really good, when they're kind of, in what I call like their vantage point, they look a lot more like 7s. They can loosen up. Like they're not as concerned with being absolutely right all the time. They have a little bit more flow to them. Yeah. So, I mean, what do you think?
Did you feel any of that, Adriana? I like Abby actually one time told me if you're reading or learning about something about a number and it makes you want to like throw that piece of information in the trash, that you're probably on the right track of where you fall.
Huh.
Yeah.
So, did you get any visceral reactions about anything she said?
No.
That might be helpful.
I know, right? 7, I felt like that. The whole life of the party thing didn't really.
No, it's not
you.
No.
Right?
I agree. There is one that she mentioned that like jumped out at me just knowing
it. 5?
It was 5.
Yeah,
all the knowledge and you doing all the research that you do and reading as much as you do and always wanting to learn more. And like, I imagine that your browser has 75,000 tabs open at any given time on all the different things that you want to read about. So that, when you said that really.
Yeah, the way you framed it, I was like, oh, okay, that's right. Whatever I read was garbage. I was like, that is not right.
And there's some things about 5s that like they don't always like to like share of themselves. They don't want to be intruded upon. So like if there's somebody, especially like emotional intrusion can be like.
Okay, I'm a 5.
Yeah.
Stop.
All right, this is too deep.
She's like, okay, we're done now.
Go on to somebody else.
That was emotional intrusion and we're done.
And get out.
Well, if you maybe think you're a 5, then could we move into how can 8 to 5? How can we do this business together?
Yeah. Okay, so this is super interesting. Also, I'm going to give a shout out to my podcast because I just released an episode about fives.
Oh.
So
I listened to that.
Yeah,
I did.
Yeah. So I do I do an episode every week, and one episode is like a teaching episode where I share a little bit about the number, and then the week after is an interview with somebody from that number. So you get kind of like this informational perspective, and then you get to kind of see it in action. And I just did the like informational thing with fives, and by the time this airs, my 5 episode will also be up. So you can check that out if you're interested in learning more about fives.
Now, yeah.
So this is really interesting, like having an 8, 5, and a 2. Like, I'm kind of curious, like, how did this come to be? Like, not to totally derail, but like, I'm like, ooh.
I pulled up the little chart, and actually an 8, 5, and a 2, it looks like they share some lines.
They
so,
do. Yeah, it's really interesting.
That is very interesting.
You don't 8, 5s, and 2s don't share. So like when we break things down in the Enneagram, it's always into triads, like groups of 3. And 8, 5, and 2 all lead with different centers. So you have the head center, you have the heart center, and you have the body center. And like the Enneagram is your type is kind of based on which one you use first and most, and then which one you use least.
Can I tell you who has who? Heart, body, head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so basically this configuration like could be the absolute best or the absolute worst. Like and I say that only because because you have someone from each center who like leads from each center, you have the ability to really tackle problems in a very balanced way. If you're all kind of willing and able to be flexible enough and be willing to see things from other people's perspectives, because some problems when you're running a business with someone need to be addressed immediately and need to be handled like yesterday, and Alexis's 8 energy is going to come in and handle it. Right. And sometimes when you're dealing with things, especially talking about motherhood and parenting, you need a softer touch, and you need somebody who can be more emotionally empathetic, and so Naya's here and like rocking the 2. But then sometimes like you need the hard facts, and you need the research, and you need the information. And if you're a 5, then like Adriana, that is so your wheelhouse, where you can, and then if you bring all these 3 things together, you've got this really holistic and balanced approach to kind of anything. Also, the problem is that if you're not willing to see things from other people's perspective, you guys have no overlap. Very, very little overlap.
That makes sense, yeah.
And it's interesting because 8s, 2s, and 5s, in some sense, are like almost like the signifiers of their triad in some sense. They're not what we call the anchor points. That's a totally different thing. But like, there's nobody more in their head, in the head center, than the 5. And like, there's nobody more in their body moving forward than the 8s. And, there's nobody more kind of feeling and in tune with other people than the 2. Like, and who can kind of act from that empathetic place. And so you have kind of these like, they're really great gifts and can turn into really terrible curses if, not managed appropriately. Yeah. So
how do we prevent an explosion?
Coming from the 8. I think, it really requires everybody doing their own work. But having this kind of, I think just having the language in general is super helpful. So even if you don't go home and really start working on your own personal transformation and self-realization, just in your spare time between, right?
Mine too.
Yeah. Between the kids and everything else, like just having the information in the language makes it a lot easier. Because it does kind of take the pressure off. Like, it's not anything personal. It really is just, we all kind of come in with a way that we see the world, and we're working to step outside of it. But for the most part, that's where we are. This is where we sit. And so really getting comfortable with the fact that like, okay, it's not personal. It's, like being able to navigate conflict in that way is super, super helpful. And then, from there, it's like, okay, understanding more about the other person's type. It's like, okay, Adriana, you probably need a lot of space. And I could imagine getting on a podcast, is it every 2 weeks, every week? It's often,
pretty frequent.
And sharing like your life as a mom, like that, I'm sure that's super hard for you. And
you have to put
like,
yourself out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Like putting like that's, and like you're on social media and you have a blog and all this stuff. And like, that's a lot of work for a 5. And it's, then you guys can appreciate what kind of work that is. And I know the appreciation helps. And then, like, Alexis, you've got so much energy. And, like 8s are like the superheroes of the Enneagram to a lot of people, like we can just do more. We can just do more than most other people, for reasons that are both good and bad. But, like there's a lot of energy there and you bring that energy to everything you do. And, sometimes that is a great fit and sometimes it's not. And then it's like up to Naya and Adriana to be like, she's just got a lot of energy.
Yeah.
Like, it's not about me. It's not about, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't, like, it's not a reflection of me. It's just, she's got a lot of energy. And maybe that's hard for me to take. And maybe I need to take some space. Or maybe I need to give Alexis more time to process. Or what, it's like really taking into consideration the other person. And, Naya, like, you're a heart type. Like, you are big heart all the way.
And I posted this on your Instagram. I'm like, between being an astrological sign of a Cancer and being a helper, I'm going to give until I die. And I'm like, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
And that's, and you wrote that and like, you kind of laugh, but I was in training with people who literally gave until they were on the brink of death, like hospital.
Okay, I'm
like,
sorry. Now I feel shitty for saying
no, it's not. It's not
too.
something. It's not something to feel shitty about. Like, it's true.
Yeah.
Like, and so, Alexis and Adriana, you can see that like, okay, she's going to really give her heart and soul in this project. Can you take some of the load off? Can you be, 2s are not going to be self-disclosing of their own needs. Can you be more intentional about asking? Because this information about her and you want her to grow just like you want yourself to grow. And so it's like, if you have 3 people who are all doing their own work and supporting each other while they, like, it makes it that much better. So you have this really incredible opportunity to do something really awesome and in a really like incredible way because you have kind of all of these centers working together. But it can also be a huge powder keg.
Yeah.
So it's really about like checking yourself, seeing what's up, and then really considering the other person and where they're coming from. That's like the whole of Enneagram work right there.
We're doing pretty good though. I feel like we are. Like, I feel like we try and think of each other and our personalities without knowing that.
Yeah.
We work really hard to and we're pretty honest. I feel like sometimes we're like, okay, this is hard for me, whatever emotional, non-emotional, whatever it is.
Yeah, like one of the previous podcasts we recorded, we were like, maybe we shouldn't put that out yet. And we're like, that's fine. Let's just shelve it and we'll deal with it later.
Yeah.
I think we're almost out of time and I'm really sad.
No, I am too.
I feel like you should at least share some resources and tell us a little bit more about your podcast, where to find you,
and your practice and all of that.
Yeah, definitely. So you can find me at like my kind of personal practice stuff is at Abi Robins Yoga on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff. And abirobinsyoga.com is my website to find out more about me. And there are some Enneagram resources on there. My podcast is called Conscious Construction. And it's all about the Enneagram and how we put it into work. So if you're interested in learning more about the Enneagram, it's a really great resource. The narrative Enneagram, like the school of Enneagram teaching that I come from, their website is enneagramworldwide.com. And that's amazing resource for, figuring out your type. And, they have like a great section on types that look alike and how to distinguish them, and types and relationship and all that good stuff. So there's a lot of great resources there. And then I just launched for the podcast my like Enneagram specific stuff. So Conscious Enneagram on Instagram and Conscious Ennea on Twitter. And there's going to be a consciousenneagram.com coming in the next like month or two or whenever I can get the website up. Well, it'll have like even more resources and, years from now, hopefully a book and all that good stuff.
That's
so
awesome.
yeah, I'm putting that out into the universe. Yeah, so you guys can find me there. I do typing interviews if you're interested in finding out more about your own type, and I do Enneagram coaching combined with yoga therapy. And we didn't even get to talk about why they're connected and how they're helpful, but we can talk, find me on my stuff. Oh, okay. Yeah. We can. All right, cool. Yeah. Well, it's basically the Enneagram is a great tool as you learn a lot about yourself, but those practices, those patterns are really ingrained. And so the practices of yoga help you to create more space between, stimulus and response. Mm-hmm. And when you're in your type pattern, when you're just like running your 8-ness or your 2-ness or your 5-ness, there's like no space between like the outside world and how you're reacting. And so everything is just reactive. And, tools like conscious movement, conscious breathing, and meditation help to create more space. And they specifically address these centers. So like movement addresses the body center, and breathing addresses the emotional center, and meditation addresses the head center. And we all have all three of those. And so when you combine all three of these in a practice, it can be really transformational for people. So
you just posted about that for each number on your Instagram.
Yeah.
I saw that.
So there's little tips on contemplative practices for each number, because the way that you're going to practice, depending on your type, it has to be different. One size does not fit all, like not for parenting and not for, your own personal practice as well.
Yeah.
So very cool.
Yeah. One last question, because I was super curious. How did you come up with the name for your podcast, Conscious Construction?
Yeah. There were a lot of things. I go to a church in Austin called the Church of Conscious Harmony, and it's lovingly referred to as the church with the funny name by like all its members. And I was talking with Tim Cook, the minister who was there for 30 years, who founded the church. He recently retired, but we were talking about where the name came from. And he spent a lot of time in India and like working with a guru and all this stuff. And the trading companies there are all have these very auspicious names. And it was a thing that you did. You named something in order to bring that thing into the world. So whatever you wanted your business or your hotel or whatever you had, whatever you wanted that to be, you would name it as such. Mm-hmm. And so I took that into consideration. And I'm really interested in this idea of being really mindful about creating a life that matters and that has a lot of meaning. And so this idea of consciously constructing, your life and the way you want it to work, and the way you want to be in the world. And so that's kind of where it came from. And I like when you think about conscious things, it's all very like heady. And I really wanted something that, like, I knew I wanted that word in there, but then I wanted something that could kind of bring it down to earth. And like this idea of construction, like they feel a little like juxtaposed, but yes. That's like on purpose. Like that's awesome. You have to have both sides.
Yeah. Hot damn, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh, I'm really sad that we don't have time
I know.
left.
This is awesome.
Yeah. This was amazing and very helpful.
Of course. Well, maybe we can do it again. We can dive a little bit more into parenting.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot to talk about there for sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Cool.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Abby.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Yay.
Thanks for listening to Top Knot Squad. If you like what you hear, then be sure to click the subscribe button in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a review. Want to internet stalk us? Find us on Facebook or Instagram at Top Knot Squad and interact with us. We love making new friends.